Nobody expected the wedding of the year to turn into a public confession, screamed by 3 children. Guests are screaming, the bride trembles, the groom stands frozen at the altar. And then, in the very center of the aisle, 3 little faces, triplets no less, shaking but defiant, point straight at him and say, "You're our dad." The bride drops her bouquet, flashbulbs go off, the crowd panics. How did children no one knew existed end up destroying the Sinclair wedding? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. It all started with Jeffrey Sinclair, a self-made billionaire renowned for his charm and business acumen, marrying his longtime fiancée, Olivia. To the outside world, it was the perfect fairy tale. An elegant venue, crystal chandeliers, a guest list stacked with high-profile names. But as the music swelled and everyone held their breath, something inside one of the twins shifted. A mixture of fear and righteous courage. Jeffrey, in a crisp black tux, held Olivia's hand, his eyes shining with pride, never imagining that his carefully constructed life was about to unravel in seconds. The triplets, Emma, Ethan, and Eliza, had never met their father publicly, but they knew him. And on that day, faces tight with emotion, they blurted the truth louder than any rehearsed vow. "You're our dad." The crowd went silent, and then chaos erupted. Cameras snapped, some guests gasped, the bride's shoulders shook. She didn't know whether to scream or cry. Jeffrey stared, speechless, caught between shock, guilt, and something darker he'd buried years ago. Let me tell you how this all came to be and how it exposed a secret that changed everything. The truth behind that explosive moment stretches back years before the Sinclair wedding, to a man named Roman Sinclair, a billionaire hotel mogul whose entire life was built on control, structure, and emotional distance. Roman wasn't the kind of man who allowed imperfections into his world. Everything he touched had to shine, including his relationships. By his side stood Vanessa Harrington, his glamorous fiancée whose charm alone could silence a room. People envied her, praised her, copied her style, but few knew that her grace masked an ambition sharper than steel. And then there was Angela Sinclair, Roman's mother, a woman who ruled the family like a quiet storm, never raising her voice, yet somehow dictating every heartbeat of Roman's life. Angela had spent years ensuring the Sinclair name remained spotless, even if it meant erasing people who didn't fit the family's pristine image. One of those people was Renee Marshall, the mother of the triplets. 8 years ago, she vanished without warning, leaving no message, no explanation, and no trace. At least, that's what the public believed. But beneath the polished floors of the Sinclair Grand Hotel ballroom, where the wedding was held, her truth had been waiting to surface. The ballroom itself was a testament to the Sinclair empire. High ceilings glittering with chandeliers, tables clothed in ivory silk, the scent of fresh orchids filling the air. This wedding wasn't just a celebration, it was a merger of 2 powerful families, a moment Roman and Vanessa believed would cement their place at the top. For Vanessa, success meant influence, wealth, and a future where the world bent effortlessly in her direction. For Angela, it meant burying the past permanently, especially Renee. But Renee had not spent 8 years hiding for no reason. She had been protecting Hope, King, and Truth, the triplets who each carried pieces of Roman that could never be denied. Hope, gentle and wise beyond her years. King, bold and impulsive. Truth, observant and heartbreakingly honest. Tonight, Renee had reached a breaking point. She knew she could no longer let her children grow up believing lies crafted by adults who valued image over innocence. She stepped out of the shadows because she had to, and because someone pushed her into silence 8 years ago. And now the question everyone is asking hangs heavy in the air. Why did Renee vanish without a trace? And what forced her to return today?
In the years before this chaos, before the wedding, before the triplets stood trembling in front of hundreds of stunned guests, there was once a quiet and unexpected love between Roman Sinclair and Renee Marshall. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't planned, and it wasn't something either of them ever expected to become serious. They were young, hopeful, and for a short while, Roman allowed himself to be someone he never showed the world, gentle, open, and surprisingly human. Renee brought out a softness in him that even his closest friends had never seen, and for a time they created a small world of their own, one built on late-night talks, shared meals, and whispered dreams. But for Angela Sinclair, Roman's mother, none of it was acceptable. Renee was too ordinary, too unpredictable, too much of a risk to the Sinclair name. Angela kept her distance at first, then started showing up unannounced, quietly criticizing, quietly observing, quietly nudging Roman away from the life he was building with Renee. Roman didn't see the pattern forming. Not until one night everything fell apart without warning, without explanation, without closure. The breakup itself became a mystery that no one dared to speak about. Roman told friends they grew apart. Renee told no one anything at all. One day she was seen with him, happy and glowing, and the next she vanished so completely that even the people closest to her were left confused. There were whispers that she had gone through something traumatic, something that shook her so deeply she chose isolation over explanation. Roman moved on far too quickly, burying the pain under work, deadlines, and a new image of himself that could not afford weaknesses. He retrained his heart to forget. He began living as if Renee had never existed. Meanwhile, Renee was raising the triplets in a small apartment on the other side of the city, holding on to love and fear at the same time, teaching her children to laugh even when she was quietly breaking inside. She carried a weight no mother should carry alone, and every birthday, every school play, every scraped knee reminded her of what Roman never knew he had lost. What no one understood, not even the children, was that Renee never planned to bring them to the wedding. She had spent the entire week preparing herself emotionally, trying to be strong, trying to stay invisible. But the night before the wedding, Hope, King, and Truth overheard her crying softly in the kitchen. They heard her whisper, "I wish things didn't have to be like this." And those words settled heavily in their small hearts. They didn't know the full story, but they knew their mother was hurting, and they knew the man in the news, the man smiling beside Vanessa Harrington, was the same man from the old photographs hidden in Renee's drawer. So the children made a decision no one could have anticipated. They waited until Renee fell asleep, then slipped out in the morning, determined to stand in front of the one person they believed deserved to know the truth, no matter how much chaos it caused. What makes this moment even more heartbreaking is the reason Renee never told Roman about the children in the first place. It wasn't pride, and it wasn't bitterness. It was fear, real, tangible fear rooted in something that had happened 8 years earlier. Renee wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting Hope, King, and Truth from something she believed could destroy them. She spent years watching over her shoulder, choosing silence over danger, choosing distance over confrontation, hoping her sacrifice was enough to keep her children safe. But now, as the truth spills into the open and the wedding collapses under the weight of secrets, we are left with a question that pierces deeper than any dramatic moment at the altar. What was Renee protecting the children from? The chaos in the ballroom only grew heavier as the triplets' words echoed through the air. Vanessa Harrington, still in her flawless white gown, didn't hide her fury for even a second. She marched straight toward Renee, with a sharpness that silenced half the room. The guests parted instinctively, forming a circle around the two women as if they were watching a scandal unfold on a stage. Phones were raised immediately, whispers turned into accusations. Some guests glared at Renee with judgment, while others looked at her with sympathy, sensing a truth that shook them more than they expected. Vanessa, her voice trembling with anger, demanded to know why Renee would destroy her wedding and whether the children were part of some grand scheme. Renee stood frozen, clutching her hands, her eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights and years of buried pain. Meanwhile, Roman remained rooted near the altar, pale and overwhelmed, torn between defending his fiancée, confronting his past, and acknowledging the three small faces staring at him with hope and confusion. No one noticed that Angela Sinclair had quietly stepped back, observing, calculating, her expression unreadable. As more guests joined the commotion, the tension shifted. Some muttered that Roman should have spoken up. Others began asking why Vanessa reacted with such certainty, as though she knew more than she admitted. And then came the moment that changed everything. Vanessa slipped. Not physically, but verbally. In her rage, she said a sentence she instantly regretted. "I told you this would happen if she ever showed up again." The room fell silent. Even the phone cameras lowered a little as people turned to Roman, waiting for his reaction. That single slip implied something much deeper, something far beyond a normal ex reappearing. It meant knowledge, secrets, history. Suddenly, the confrontation wasn't just about who the children were, it was about what Vanessa had been hiding and why she had so fiercely wanted this wedding to proceed without any disruption. Roman stared at her, stunned. Finally realizing there were pieces of his past Vanessa understood better than he did, pieces she chose to keep from him for reasons she never planned to reveal. And now a new question rises, one that cuts straight to the heart of this unraveling story. What does Vanessa know about Renee that Roman doesn't?
Roman didn't wait for another camera flash or another gasp from the crowd. He moved with a force he hadn't shown in years, taking Renee by the arm, firm but not violent, and guiding her and the children out of the ballroom before the chaos swallowed them whole. Hope, King, and Truth trailed behind, clinging to their mother's dress as they entered one of the private chambers inside the Sinclair Grand Hotel. The moment the door shut, Roman's control shattered. His voice cracked with a mixture of anger, betrayal, and raw confusion as he demanded, "Why now, Renee? Why would you do this today?" Renee, already trembling, tried to steady her breath. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she refused to fall apart. She whispered, "I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted them to come." Her voice fragile, yet anchored by 8 years of silent suffering. The children pressed close to her sides, sensing the storm between the adults, their small hands clutching her like she was the only safe place left in the world. Before Roman could speak again, Angela Sinclair swept into the room with the kind of authority that silenced everything. She didn't ask questions, she didn't look at the children. She simply ordered security to remove Renee immediately, as though she were an inconvenience trespassing on Sinclair territory. Her coldness made the children shrink back, and Renee instinctively shielded them. Roman stepped between them, unsure of whose side he should take, his voice softer now, cracking under the weight of realization. Renee reached into her worn purse with shaking hands and pulled out a stack of folded papers, documents she had carried everywhere, too afraid to destroy, yet too afraid to reveal. She laid them gently on the table between them. Hospital bills dated 8 years ago, marked under false name, paid entirely in cash, each one connected to a traumatic pregnancy complication she had survived alone. Roman stared at the papers, piecing together details he had never been allowed to know. Renee's disappearance wasn't a choice made lightly or carelessly. It was a survival decision. Someone had scared her into hiding. Someone had made her believe the only way to protect her unborn children was to vanish. Her voice broke as she said, "I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I had to." Roman felt a chill move through him, colder than anything he had felt standing at that altar. The triplets looked up at him with eyes full of questions he wasn't ready to answer. And as Roman stared at those hospital documents, secret bills paid in desperation, in fear, in silence, the question that had haunted Renee for years became the question now hanging heavy in the room. Who was Renee hiding from, and why? Roman stood frozen, staring at the hospital papers as if they were written in another language, but the truth inside that private room continued unfolding in fragments, painful, necessary fragments that Renee had held onto for nearly a decade. She spoke slowly, carefully, as if each memory was a wound she had never allowed to fully heal. She explained how after their breakup, strange things began happening around her. At first it was small, a shadow lingering outside her apartment window, mail going missing, footsteps behind her when she walked home at night. She told herself it was her imagination, the stress of pregnancy making her overly alert. But then the incidents became too consistent, too targeted. Someone began leaving notes on her doorstep, notes that mentioned her pregnancy, notes that included details she had never shared with anyone, notes she tried to dismiss until the night she found one slipped under her front door bearing something unmistakable, the Sinclair crest. That was the night she realized it wasn't a random stranger, it wasn't an accident. Whoever was watching her had access, confidence, and a connection to Roman's world. She reported the stalking once, going to the police with trembling hands and a heart pounding with fear. They took her statement, promised an investigation, yet days later she received a call saying the case had been closed with no explanation. She felt invisible, unprotected, and entirely alone. It wasn't until she saw Angela Sinclair at a charity event weeks later that her fear reached a breaking point. Angela never raised her voice, never made a scene. She simply approached Renee, stood too close, and said in a tone so calm it felt like ice, "Some lives cannot be allowed to interfere with Roman's future." The warning was clear. Renee understood she wasn't just being followed, she was being cornered. She was pregnant with triplets, emotionally fragile, and suddenly aware that someone connected to the Sinclair name had the power to make her disappear in more ways than one. So she did the only thing she could. She vanished before they could destroy her or her unborn children. As the flashbacks faded, the private chamber filled with a heavy silence. Renee reached into her purse again and revealed something she had never shown anyone, not even the police, a diary she had kept during those months of fear. One page, wrinkled and stained, held a caped copy of one of the threatening notes. At the bottom of the message, in sharp handwriting, the Sinclair crest appeared again. Roman's breath caught as he stared at it. He had never seen the note, never knew the police report existed, never heard about the stalking. Yet the crest belonged to his family. Somewhere within the Sinclair circle, someone had terrorized the mother of his children. In that moment, viewers can feel the depth of Renee's strength. Every choice she made was for hope, king, and truth. She wasn't the woman the wedding guests mocked in whispers. She wasn't the villain Vanessa painted her to be. She was a mother who sacrificed her own peace so her children could grow up without fear. She wasn't running from Roman, she was running from the darkness around him. Still, another question begins to form, unsettling and unavoidable. Was Roman truly unaware, or was he complicit?
As Roman stared at the diary page, overwhelmed by the weight of everything Renee had kept hidden, a sudden knock at the chamber door startled everyone inside. A hotel staff member, shaking, nervous, unsure whether to speak, stepped forward and handed Roman a small flash drive. The staff member whispered, "Someone said you needed to see this. Now," before hurrying away, almost as if he feared being seen. Roman hesitated, his hand trembling slightly as he plugged the drive into the tablet on the table. Renee held her breath. Angela glared at the screen with rigid composure. The triplets clung to her dress with wide, confused eyes. And then the footage began to play. It was 8 years old, grainy, dark, recorded from a hidden camera mounted in a hallway outside Renee's old apartment. At first, it showed nothing more than dim lighting and the silhouette of a staircase, but then a figure appeared, standing just outside Renee's door. The viewers could see the person slipping a note under her entrance, the same type of note that later forced her into hiding. The figure looked around before turning slightly toward the camera. Even though the face was partially obscured, the posture, height, and clothing were unmistakable. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't a random stalker. This was someone directly connected to Roman's life, someone who had access to the Sinclair crest, someone who wanted Renee gone long before she ever became a threat to any wedding. The revelation struck the room like a blow. Roman's breathing hitched. Renee covered her mouth with a shaking hand. The children pressed even tighter against her sides as the reality settled over them all. Someone they knew had engineered her disappearance. But who? Vanessa, whose ambition depended on controlling Roman's future? Angela, who had always believed that protecting the Sinclair legacy required erasing unwanted pieces of the past? A jealous ex who never accepted losing Roman? Or someone else entirely? Someone quieter, more calculating, whose motives stretched deeper than anyone suspected? The twist didn't answer the question. It only widened the suspicion and deepened the mystery, leaving Roman more unsettled than ever before. And in the middle of that tension, the children did something no one expected. Hope, King, and Truth exchanged a silent look, a look full of memories they had been too afraid to voice. They knew something they had held on to since the night they saw a shadow outside their home long before the wedding, but they hadn't spoken because they didn't want to frighten their mother or burden her with more than she already carried. Their eyes now flickered between Roman and the paused surveillance footage, as if deciding whether it was finally time to share what they witnessed. Before we continue, if you're still watching at this point, comment "still here" or tell us your country. Let's see who's following this story to the end. And now a new question rises, a question that will shape everything that follows. The children know something. But what did they see that night? Outside the private room, the wedding had collapsed into full-scale chaos. News outlets were already alerted. Camera crews gathered at the hotel entrance. Guests who once arrived with polished smiles and high expectations now hurried toward the exits, whispering theories and shaking their heads. Some blamed Renee. Some blamed Roman. Others whispered that Vanessa had known something dark all along. Vanessa herself was unraveling in the hallway, pacing with frantic breaths, pulling at her hair, muttering about how everything she had worked for was slipping through her fingers. Meanwhile, Angela Sinclair barked orders at hotel staff, trying desperately to regain control of a situation she no longer understood, insisting the wedding continue, as if public humiliation could simply be ignored. But the real storm raged inside the private chamber. Roman sat across from Renee, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly, despite his attempt to appear composed. He finally whispered, "Tell me the truth. All of it." And for the first time in 8 painful years, Renee did. She explained how, after the breakup, Angela found out she was pregnant. She described the night Angela appeared at her door, not threatening her directly, but making it unmistakably clear that Renee and her unborn children were a threat to the Sinclair legacy. She revealed that the stalking, the notes, the fear that consumed her life was not random. Roman listened, horrified, as she told him that Angela had paid someone to scare her into leaving. The room went still. Even Angela momentarily lost her composure, though she tried to hide it behind a tight, practiced expression. Renee reached into her purse once more. This time, she pulled out a small, weathered lockbox. Inside were printed emails, bank transfer confirmations, and 2 voice recordings. Her hands trembled as she placed them on the table, evidence she had been too afraid to use, yet too afraid to destroy. Roman's heart pounded as he played the first recording. A voice, masked, but unmistakably connected to someone with power, spoke about removing the problem and ensuring Renee never resurfaced. The second recording hinted at payment from an account linked to the Sinclair family. Suddenly, everything Roman believed about his family began to crumble. His upbringing, his mother's guidance, his loyalty. Everything felt uncertain. Vanessa burst into the room, insisting that the documents were forged, claiming Renee had orchestrated the entire scandal to ruin the wedding. She accused Renee of manipulation, of desperation, of lies crafted to destroy the Sinclair name. Renee didn't argue. She simply placed her palm on her children's heads as they looked up at Roman with tear-filled eyes, begging him to believe their mother. "She's telling the truth," Hope whispered. "She never lied to us," King added. "She protected us." Truth, always the quietest, simply said, "Please listen." Their voices shook Roman more than anything else had that day. Angela stood tall and cold, refusing to admit anything, refusing even to glance at the evidence. Her silence was its own kind of confession, or its own defense. Roman looked between the documents, the recordings, the mother of his children, the woman he was supposed to marry, and the mother who raised him. His entire past now felt like shifting sand under his feet. And in this moment of fractured trust and broken loyalties, one question became impossible to ignore, pressing against every heart in the room. Who is lying? Who is telling the truth? Renee's voice trembled as she sank slightly into the chair, the weight of years pressing down on her shoulders. She whispered, I almost didn't make it. Tears welling in her eyes. The birth. It was dangerous. I was scared every second, and all I wanted was for you to be there, Roman. Her hand shook as she reached for the lockbox, a symbol of the years she had carried alone, years of fear and courage intertwined. Roman's face tightened, his jaw rigid as guilt and disbelief battled for dominance inside him. She continued, her voice breaking but steady in its truth. I tried to reach you. I sent messages. I called. I left everything I could think of, and Angela blocked every single one. I watched you propose to Vanessa on live television while I held our newborns in our arms. 3 tiny lives, our children, and you were somewhere else, somewhere we couldn't reach you. The triplets clung to her sides, their small bodies shaking, sensing the magnitude of her mother's pain. The room seemed to shrink around Roman as the enormity of her confessions sank in. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just secrecy. It was a lifetime of choices made under fear and control. A mother's love stretched across every impossible barrier. A man finally seeing the consequences of distance and obedience. Roman's eyes flicked to Angela, who said nothing, and then back at Renee and the children, realizing that his understanding of loyalty, family, and love had been incomplete for too long. And in that moment, one question pressed into the room heavier than any argument, heavier than any accusation. Will Roman stand up to his mother or betray Renee again?
The tension in the private chamber became unbearable. Vanessa, her polished composure finally cracking, confessed in a trembling voice that she had known about the children all along. I saw the letters, she admitted, eyes darting nervously between Roman and Renee. I knew they existed, but I didn't say anything. I thought it didn't matter. I just wanted this wedding to happen. Her words landed like stones, each one heavier than the last. Roman's expression shifted from shock to disbelief as the realization sank in. Everyone around him had been carrying pieces of the truth, choosing secrecy over honesty, convenience over conscience. Angela Sinclair, unshaken, tried to regain control, her voice cold and authoritative. She insisted that the wedding must continue, that Roman's duty to family and legacy outweighed every other consideration. The Sinclair name cannot be compromised, she said, her gaze fixed firmly on Roman as if daring him to defy her. Renee, exhausted and broken, sank to her knees. Tears streamed down her face, but she refused to beg, refused to shrink, refused to allow fear to dictate her children's future any longer. Her dignity, her courage, shone brighter than any argument Angela could make. Then, as if the tension couldn't rise any further, Renee reached into her bag and pulled out a small device. It was a recording. One of the triplets had secretly captured it years ago, long before the wedding chaos. The voice was chilling, firm, and unmistakably commanding. Make her disappear. The Sinclair name must remain clean. The weight of the words hung in the air, freezing everyone in place. Roman's hand shook as he reached for the device, his mind racing. The voice belonged to someone he trusted, someone whose betrayal cut deeper than anything he had imagined. The final twist slammed into the room like a thunderclap. And in that moment, the most pressing question pierced through every heartbeat in the chamber. Whose voice is on that recording? And how will Roman react? The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with a chilling clarity. The voice on the recording, the voice that had orchestrated Renee's disappearance, was Angela Sinclair. The woman who had controlled every corner of Roman's life, every family decision, every calculated move. She had been the one to threaten, to intimidate, to erase the mother of his children. The truth hit like a tidal wave, shattering the remaining illusions of loyalty and power in the room. The wedding, already in chaos, collapsed completely. The orchestra stopped. Guests whispered frantically, realizing the ceremony they came to celebrate was no longer happening. Roman, finally fully awake to the manipulation surrounding him, made a choice. He called off the marriage, his voice steady but firm, as he publicly apologized to Renee, defending the children who had unknowingly brought the truth into the open. Angela Sinclair was removed from the venue under the scrutiny of the press, her icy demeanor replaced with stunned silence as cameras recorded her every step. Vanessa Harrington, humiliated and exposed, left the hotel without a word, her ambitions evaporated in the wake of the revelations. Inside, Renee finally allowed herself to collapse, the weight of years of fear, stress, and courage pressing down on her. Roman immediately swept her into his arms, holding her steady as the triplets ran to follow, their small hands clutching the hem of his suit. In that moment, family, true family, was restored, not through perfection, but through honesty, bravery, and love. And as the dust settled, we are reminded, sometimes the truth doesn't come gently. Sometimes it storms in with the voices of children who refuse to stay silent. So now we leave you with the questions that linger. What do you think really happened 8 years ago? And did Roman deserve forgiveness? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if this story hit you like it did us, hit that like button. It helps us reach more people. And subscribe if you want more gripping stories every day.